Hello, Meg.
Hi.
I'm so excited that you're here.
I'm happy to be here and nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's, I guess, dive into who you are, your book, what's exciting. Yeah, let us know all about you.
Exciting. Um, yeah, I have a debut novel coming out September 24th, 2024, called Necrology. It's an adult horror. Um, so I could talk a little more about that. But about me, I suppose I'm a designer by trade. I don't know how I got here, but I'm very happy to be here. I've written for a long time, and I have always taken it very seriously, but my dream of becoming a published author always felt like a real stretch. So I really, it's been a long time in the works, it feels like, and at the same time, it's at this point, it's all gravy for me because it's sort of like a second career, I suppose. How
Yeah.
about
Well, there's
how
also
about
some
you?
freedom, I feel like, in being able to play in the things that you enjoy.
It's true.
So,
I mean, I feel like having no pressure, it's not was ne has never been a source of financial income. It's
mhm,
always purely something I've loved. I think I didn't really get serious about writing until after my kids were born because it was at a time when my studio went away. Art supplies, it was harder to have them out because little toddlers were wandering around and grabbing for things, and my time was no longer my own.
mhm.
And I had an idea for drawing at one point, and I have a twin sister who's also an artist. And she said, just write it down. Make sure you write it down. Don't forget. I pitched her the sort of what the concept was. And don't you know that day by day I worked on that little piece of writing and it turned into a book. And that was my first novel. Of course,
That
no
is
one
so
is ever
cool.
going to read it. No one's ever going to,
Yeah.
but it set up the practice. And I think that
Yeah.
the the learning curve of setting up a practice is probably the hardest battle, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Yeah, I'm similar. I work full time just as an editor. So I work for a private company writing curriculum for them. I started in academia, so loved sort of the craft of storytelling. That's what I taught is writing and being able to play, like you're saying, outside of, I guess, more formal, like either academic or technical writing. I'm able to express myself, I think, in a different way. And it's interesting because I was born and raised in the South and always wanted to get out and go do something, big in my mind. And I was always taught like for writing, you have to go to New York or LA or, somewhere big.
Mm-hmm.
And got the opportunity to go all over the place. My husband was in the Marine Corps, so we lived all over the US. We lived in Hawaii and we're back in the South and it's really within like after we moved back, we were stationed in Virginia and it was like I was home again. I don't know how to describe it, but I finally like found my voice and really started writing short stories while I was teaching, moved more into editing and wrote actually a few novels. I'm like you. I've written yeah, works before Pocket Full of Teeth.
Yeah.
Um but am really excited to get this story out because I think it expresses sort of the toil that happens in story. I don't know. I'm really excited to see people and their interpretations of it because it's a Southern Gothic, um, but it's also very meta and literary as well. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I think my start was actually I did come to New York to be a famous artist.
Yeah, yeah.
But don't as it went, I found myself less in drawing, like I came for drawing.
Mhm.
Joined an MFA in Manhattan, my little 22-year-old badass self, like I was going to take on the world. And that program, though, did have a writing component in it. And it was taught by a writer named Michelle Zackheim. And at the time when they said, no, 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 it's mandatory, you have to take the class. I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah.
But, it was like the seed that I didn't really
Mhm.
like sow until years later, but it really was, I was like, oh, this actually is really productive in an artistic way for me, really um, reassuring. I felt really satisfied with the product that was coming out, describing
Hmm.
what smells like. You can't do that in a
Yeah.
drawing.
Yeah.
It was sort of liberating in a really different way. Yeah.
Hmm. It's really cool. So do you have any particular influences for your book? What kind of caught your attention and said, you have to write this? Was there a moment or a certain thing that happened?
Yeah, I mean, for influences for this book, you're not going to
Hmm.
believe it, or maybe you would, maybe it's obvious to anyone who's reading it. But so my family has so I live in Brooklyn in a small
Hmm.
apartment with kids and a dog. And but we have a place in the Catskills, which is not too far away in the woods. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have a TV or internet upstate. And
Hmm.
I really got into the habit of reading out loud to my kids. And at one point, we started reading his dark materials, The Golden Compass. And I'm telling you, it was the most, I don't think I've ever been like since my youth, Alice in
Hmm.
Wonderland or C.S. Lewis or Roald Dahl, those were all the things that I was into. And I think I'd never read a fantasy to my kids. And I'm telling you that book was so amazing to read out loud to them, and I'd find
Hmm.
myself reading it after they fell asleep. But that it this book came about at the beginning of the pandemic, when on the news we had Harvey Weinstein, we had Me Too, we
Hmm.
had we had women dying because they were locked inside with men who loved them. And at the time, I remember feeling like, how could anything be scarier than this effing pandemic?
Hmm.
But the truth is, to a lot of women, it probably was. And it dawned on me one day, this book, I was like, it'd be really incredible, Meg, if you could put Lyra in the middle of Gilead. That would be a story. And
Yeah.
there I was like, I know exactly what I need to do. I did have some surprises along the way, but I didn't know, like in that moment, I was like, what would be crazy? Let's do that. How about
Very
you?
cool. Yeah, well, I first had this idea through a short story that I had written. And usually short stories start with like a little line, and I think the line was something like, there's a woman who lives in my walls or something like that. And I was like, oh, what is this? This is
Yeah,
cool. So I wrote a short story, and then the main character just wouldn't leave me alone. And I was like, what is going on? And really, at the same time, got interested in how we tell stories. And I think it was after the pandemic where you could see different people's versions of what happened. And I feel like if you listen to one person's version of the pandemic, you're not going to get the full truth, if you can ever get the truth. And
right.
so, really went back into, well, what is storytelling? What's its purpose? How has it manifested in history? And went back to this idea that storytelling it really roots us together as people in our cultures and our relationships. It helps us work through grief and hard decisions and hard life events. And when I was kind of looking at all of that, I found that it's cyclic in nature. So, especially in the South, I'll start telling a story and then someone will say, oh, yeah, that happened to this person. And, they'll have a story. And then there's another
Yeah,
story that emerges from that. And so that's why I kind of put together a structure that's like, a story within a story within a story, but then all of them kind of have similarities and things that emerge that connect them in certain ways. So was really interested in how to do that in book form because that was very hard. And
yes,
it
it
took
sounds very
lots
hard.
of drafts. Yeah, it
Yeah,
took a lot to have it make sense, to have some of the messages come across.
yeah,
But still, I kind of wanted it to be fun too. So I have all the creepy stuff and
yeah,
um, yeah, it took a lot, and I think that's one of the most surprising things is, I work as an editor. I also work as an editor for books. So I'm used to like long form projects and helping authors kind of see the weak points. But with something like this, it really evolved as, each draft went. And I almost didn't, thought, I guess, the edits were supposed to be smaller changes, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I mean, this is totally different from how I first started, but I couldn't be prouder of, how it landed.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, similarly, I think, my expectations when it started versus when it landed, the in my story there is a lot of storytelling. In fact, my dirty women, they rely on an oral history for the most part. There's nothing written down for them.
Mhm.
And it's sort of one of my point of views. I have two point of views, one of a little girl, one of a mom slash teacher. Um, and her entire identity is her religion. And so when she's explaining things to the children of the orphanage in which she works, she's taking it very seriously. You can tell that these people are very embedded in this culture. They're so permeated by it. It's their entire identity.
Mhm.
And the flip side of that is this are my antagonists called the Freeman, and they rely on something called the Black Book that looks sort of like the Bible, although it'd be a horrible Bible. And but the who rely on a literal like written word for
Mhm.
their basically their instruction.
Huh.
Dividing both of those streams and combining them, because of course, like all religions, it's most interesting at the pinch points between them where they cross over,
Mhm.
where you can see, oh, originally maybe something actually used to be, or someone maybe took a wrong turn there. Those
Mhm.
are the instances that were the most interesting to me, but it did muddy things up for me, I would say, like keeping track of like who was what, who calls God, Father, or
Mhm.
something else. It turned into a lot to keep track of, but it was
Yeah.
worth it. I think it paid off. So
Yeah, that's interesting because how you have one, this is the book, this is the word, kind of like in mine, it's never going to be the truth, right? It's never going to
yeah,
be exact or um, it's never going to be good for everybody this one way. So I think it's cool
exactly.
that the oral traditions are kind of the closest to truth, I guess.
It was hard. It was actually hard to write because I didn't want like it kept coming out very dumpy, like a
Mhm.
full history of these dirty women. I'd get on in like six pages, and I'd be like, oh, and I thought I trimmed it down, and then finally my editor Amanda was like, we're gonna cut this.
Yeah. Yep.
She's in charge. She knows best. So
Well, with that, I guess how does the location, since it seems like oral history is connected so much to a place, how would the location, like, how did you determine, where to have it set? And um, I guess also, how did you know what, I guess, reality would be like for these characters as well?
oh, that's that was well. I'll start with the location. So my location, the book starts in the Catskills, which was familiar territory when I was writing it.
Hmm.
But it made sense for my main characters who are with the comfort zone. So the my child protagonist Rabbit winds up in Albany, while Whitetail, the teacher, winds up in prison in a place called Liberty, which is basically Syracuse. And I think that the location was important because at the onset, you sort of have a feeling of peacefulness and outdoorsy, woodsy, nature is queen, for the opposition to be figures of industrialization, railways, and, you know, eyes on the future. It made the most sense for the pivot, basically with my inciting incident, that people are going to be tossed out of the woods into concrete and misery. So,
Mm, yeah.
but yeah, keep going.
Well, I think that's really fascinating because you have like I guess a juxtaposition of nature versus like this
Yeah.
cold, hard sort of world. That's really cool.
How about you? Location? Is it set in the South?
Yeah, so it is right outside of Birmingham, Alabama, where I mean, it's basically where I live right now. And I did a lot of looking at the history of the mines around here and how Birmingham kind of came to be. And I'm born and raised like right outside of Atlanta, so it's not that far, but we, I guess, never have that history told in our schools.
Yeah.
But yeah, Birmingham was this big, huge, like steel mining, had tons of coal come out of the area. And so you have these little settlements all over. And then Birmingham is sort of the hub where all the railroads are and they ship everything out. And so there's lots of towns where there were old mines and there were these little communities that had popped up. And now we're seeing a lot of the communities that have fallen kind of into disrepair. You know, the mines closed down, people left, and now it's being redeveloped into these suburban, like
Okay.
oases almost.
Uh-huh.
So I took inspiration from that history and have it set where it's kind of going through this identity change. And at the same time, my character is also going through this identity change. She's growing up. She has to come to terms with the death of her mother. And yeah, it's just the sense of place, I think, was very important to me. And I set it over the course of a year so that we get the full seasons of Birmingham and we get a little bit of like Southern history, Southern culture kind of embedded in that as well. So I thought that was very important to have in the story.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I think that there's a whole history of, the Southern Gothic, right? So,
Hmm.
um, yeah. Your title, I'm curious about your title, or can you tell us?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, within the story, so it starts off with an interview. A woman is being questioned by police about her husband who was found in this well. And she's like, well, to tell you the story, I have to start reading from this book that my mom was working on before she died. And she was editing it and fact checking it for the university. So I'm going to have to start there. And so we kind of dive into that memoir that her mom was working on. And inside, you have notes from her mom, which is kind of cool. But it really outlines the story of a girl coming to terms with her own mother's death. So we have a
Mm.
connection between those. And then embedded kind of in that, she's obsessed with mythology. So we talk about Pan and Echo, sort of that mythology.
Yep.
We have fairy tales. We have, I mean, all sorts of like Southern folklore as well as in there. And so she makes up her own, I guess, fairy tale that has a monster with a pocket full of teeth. So
Ooh,
yeah.
love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw that one of your comps was Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, and
Mhm.
once I read that, I was like, maybe it's like the Cup of Stars or something. Like if there's something there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually, yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of my big references. So in my book, there's lots of references to like King, to Shirley Jackson, some of our great. I think there's some Ray Bradbury that kind of made its way in
Woo.
there because I love his his stuff. But definitely the Couple of Stars is in there indirectly. There's lots of tea and references to food. And I was
Mhm.
really obsessed also with how food both nourishes us and can poison us.
Yeah.
And even love, love can nourish us or poison us depending on, who it is, the type of love.
Hmm.
So lots of things that have opposites that I think Shirley Jackson was really good at. And of course, her perspective, the way she tells a story, and you're like, wait a second, I don't know if that's a good character anymore. Or like, wait, was
No.
she telling the truth the whole time? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was obsessed with that as well. Because when you're telling story, it's always from a certain perspective, and you have to keep that in mind.
Right. Right. I think that that's part of the hardest parts of writing for me. I don't think I've ever
Mhm.
successfully accomplished a manuscript from one point of view because I'm always like, oh, I can't fit this into their point of view. I've got to add another one. And then my brain is like, what are you doing? Two different character arcs. What are you doing? But it's true for me, like it really is hard to stay in my lane sometimes.
Hmm.
It's why I
Yeah,
take more than one character.
yeah. Now, what about your title as well? How did you come up with that?
Uh, you know, I very quickly knew what my story was going to be about. It was going to be about some comeuppance for four lost women.
Hmm.
unrecognized women, victims of domestic abuse, religious persecution, um, political neglect, all of those things. And I wanted to, the name just made sense because it's just synonymous with obituary. It was just a list of the dead,
Yeah.
is what necrology means. And I decided that it would be this rock that's very, very important to my group of women. Um, I call them my dirty women because they're known as the dirt. And
Mm.
it's the one thing, one of the two things, excuse me, that they're asked to hand over in a contract as collateral in negotiating them swearing off their innate magic in exchange for freedom from this religious, political um, sort of movement that's vying for an anti-magical society. Basically, and
Mm.
in this case, of course, magic is just a metaphor for women's power, right? So these women being autonomous and able to this particular group that rises to power is the first thing
Hmm.
I take away. And it's important, this rock, to these dirty women, because without it, they're left without a real it's part of their identity, being able to recognize sort of they're lost, not that they're stuck on it and not that they're vengeful, but they've endured a lot and they don't want their loss to go nameless. So
Mm.
it's absorbed by my antagonists. It is heartbreaking for them.
That's really nice. It seems like you're, yeah, passionate about kind of bringing a voice and a name to this as well. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that was the sort of the hard part about it. It's like, oh, let's add in some real historical figures. And the truth is, a lot of them are nameless and faceless.
Yeah.
Even the end of the Salem witch trials, I mean, we have a list of people involved, but you have to imagine that a lot of these, like, I don't like to use the word hysteria, but if we're gonna, I'll use it in this instance just because I think it probably is the only way to describe probably the fear and paranoia of that
Hmm.
time. That other women got hurt, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is
Similarly,
important for them.
yeah, yeah. Similarly, my book is from all female characters. And I thought that was important because um, there's a certain, especially in the South, and I mean, in American culture in general, is just, women are expected to hold certain roles in society, to behave certain ways, to speak in certain ways. And I thought that was really cool to maybe peel back that layer and say, okay, they may be saying this, but behind the scenes, this is their experience.
Yeah.
I also have some instances of like domestic abuse, and mental health was really important for me to include in this story as well. I had been teaching through the pandemic and had a really hard time with adjusting and also staying current, staying truthful in what I was teaching. I think we were seeing a lot of discrepancies between what is harmful curriculum and what could help students. And it's hard to strike that balance and stay sane, if that makes sense. Definitely went through a period of like depression in that I was so conflicted morally about what I was doing with my voice and how I was adding to the conversation or changing things or staying complacent. That was a big fear. And this book kind of came out of that and really wanted to spotlight mental health and what happens when we try to ignore it or sweep it under the rug. Um,
Mhm.
which is never good. And, lots of mental illnesses can be terminal. They can be fatal if they're not, diagnosed and then treated.
Yeah.
So that was really important for me to include in my book.
Yeah, I mean that really resonates with me. And one of my main characters, who is basically the teacher, the mistress, the mom of the house in the
Hmm.
orphanage, and what she's the her character by design is so conflicted. I mean, she te I think that you don't have to be a parent, but if you are a parent, you can also maybe especially recognize how hard it is to teach kids the
Hmm.
the way that you want to have them be their truest, best selves. You want them to have all the confidence in the world. You go out there and you steal it, honey. That's yours. That's your apple. You just take a bite. But
Hmm.
at the same time, we don't want our kids to get hurt. Like, wear what you want. You wear you. That's what you want. That's what you're comfortable. You go out. And at the same time, as a parent, you're like, oh my God, do not put yourself
Yeah.
in
In
jeopardy. So
danger.
I
Yeah.
want you to walk the walk. I want you to walk the upstanding citizen walk, and you speak out against atrocity, and you
Hmm.
fight for the little guy, but for the love of God, don't get hurt. And that
Yeah.
is Rachel's perspective. I think that it really resonated with me during the pandemic. We had, with Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all of that. And I felt like, you boys, I have two sons, you better listen. And so we would
Hmm.
have like the talks that my kids have had around my dinner table. I am the lone female in a family of all boys here. Growing
Hmm.
up, I had a single mom and two sisters. So it was all women in my house. But it's incredible how different the conversation is. And it's not
Hmm.
about defensive or offensive, but it really is, you two boys are the future. I'm relying on you to do the right thing. This is our mindset. And
Hmm.
then at the back of my brain, but don't get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the mother's plight.
Yeah. Yeah.
The teacher's plight.
Um, yeah, I know. And it, just like you were saying in the beginning, it really does, I think, change your perspective as a writer and as someone who has something to say, I think, after you have kids, because you know that it matters. It's important
It
what we're
definitely can.
doing.
It
Hmm.
definitely can. I think that it's definitely a book that I couldn't have written before now. Um,
Yeah.
and that's from I have the dual point of views. That's the child's point of view or the adult point of view. I don't think I could have worked those out before now.
Hmm. So do you have a certain character then that you relate to the most?
It's definitely whitetail because that's me.
Yeah.
That's me
Yeah.
saying if there's a fight, if you're coming out of school and you see that kid that needs help, you are gonna stand by. And then in the back of my brain, don't get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, you fight for that
Hmm.
little guy, and you do me proud.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's scary, and maybe that's, part of that is my kids are growing up and living in New York City. It's
Hmm.
like a complicated way to be, complicated place to be.
Yeah.
How about you? Favorite, who do you relate to?
I mean, I think the love interest maybe in this one. Her name is Liz, and she owns like a bakery, and she's pretty like optimistic. She's very creative. At least I hope that I'm kind of like her. That's who I aspire to be. Everybody else is kind of, I mean, they just have so many struggles, I think, that I don't know. I can see like pieces of myself in all of them, but it's not any one of them in particular, I think.
Yeah, I think
But yeah,
I mean, that's true. I think
yeah.
even with the protagonist, there's pieces of me in there. I mean, that's the thing. It's hard. You
Hmm.
can't. Can you? Someone asked me recently, is your book for every reader? And my answer is, I don't think that's possible to
Mm,
even. There doesn't exist a book for every reader, does it?
yeah.
Putting personal politics aside, um, doesn't mean they're going to put theirs. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Just,
Yeah.
you know.
I know. And I felt bad when I was writing it. I was like, I don't know if the men are redeemable in my book. And I'm like, I felt bad personally, but I was like, but if I'm being honest to these women's experience, maybe they don't see, men the same way. So,
Right. And I feel like, and
yeah.
that's the great part about writing antagonists is they're a hero in their own mind, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
all of your evil characters, I mean,
Mhm.
they're all a hero to themselves. They're, out there to do good, of course. So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
To do
that's
anything. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Well, very cool. Yeah, tell us again, remind us where, when we can find your book.
Necrology, that's from Creature Publishing, September 24th, 2024. And it's everywhere. It's on Amazon and Goodreads and book bookshop booklist.org, whatever, all of those things. All the
Perfect.
things are there.
Nice. Yep. And Pocket Full of Teeth will be out September 13th, which is Friday the 13th in September.
It is?
And
Oh, that's
yes,
perfect for you.
yeah, we're gonna have like a big party, a big, Friday the 13th party on that day.
Oh, I love it.
But yeah, it's also everywhere. So I hope everyone goes and pre-orders and shows up to our signings and events. And we'll keep you posted on social media to let you know where we are.
Amazing.
All right. Well, thank you.
It's nice to meet you.
Yep, you too.